Hey, how are you today? This is Josh Patrick, and you're at Cracking the Cash Flow Code. And my guest today is Kevin Wilhelm. And Kevin is the CEO of Sustainable Business Coaching. He's an instructor at Harvard, and he's the author of the best-selling book, How to Talk to the Other Side, Finding Common Ground in the Time of the Coronavirus, Recession, and Climate Change. But we're not going to talk about any of those three things. We are going to talk about how you have those difficult conversations with people you really disagree. So let's bring Kevin on and start the conversation. Hey, Kevin, how are you today?
I'm great, Josh. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So let's start there. I'm going to have a conversation with somebody I really know I disagree about everything with. And I know it's going to be difficult. I know it's going to be uncomfortable. And I'm afraid it's going to devolve into a shouting contest. How do I not do that?
So let me ask you, Josh, is this person a relative or a colleague?
A
It's right in the
colleague.
holidays. Okay. So the reason I always ask that is I'm getting lots of questions as we head into the holidays about how do I talk to that my crazy uncle or to my aunt who I can no longer see eye to eye with. But I think with colleagues, the way I would approach it is so often in this divisive country that we're currently living in, people are always trying to convince one another, and they're trying to tell someone why they're right and the other person is wrong. And it's really kind of uh, completely backwards from what you need to do to be successful. So one of the things that we learned through the research and all the interviews and all the focus groups we ran for this book, How to Talk to the Other Side, was that it really starts with listening. People on the other side that you completely disagree with you, they already disagree with you just like you disagree with them. And they're just chomping at the bit to tell you why they're right. So I think one of the first things to do is to listen and ask them why they hear it. And a lot of times they just want to get stuff off their chest. And if you can use authentic listening to hear where they are, and then you will start
So
to
let me
understand
let
what,
me just can I stop you for a second?
yeah,
Can we get a definition of authentic listening? Because I'm sure folks listening to this won't know
yeah.
what that means.
Well, like we've all been around that person at a party who you're talking and they're nodding their head and they can't hold themselves because they're waiting for you to end just so they can counteract you with what you're going to say. I think authentic listening is truly trying to not only hear what the person is saying, but understand what is behind what they're saying. And that I think is the key to having difficult conversations with somebody, is that if you take someone who is on the complete opposite side, ideologically, politically, religiously, however they are from you, there's something at their core that they're afraid of, that drives them anxiety, that they're angry about, that they feel is unjust, or that they're really excited about and they want to tell you. And you have to hear what that is, because so much of the noise that you hear kind of in social media and the political dynamics of television and everything just tops in those high areas. We've kind of allowed someone, if you're Republican or you're a Democrat, that become a stand-in for the person's entire value system. But we all know that that's not indicative of someone's entire value system. So I usually try and start with what I call the 4 bridge building conversations. And that is when someone comes at you and you know they're going to be disagreeable about bigger ideological issues, start with the non-controversial stuff. Ask them about their what's going on in their lives. How are they handling being cooped up in the pandemic? Tell me about your family. Where are you from? What are your hobbies and interests? And when you start doing that, and you think about it, it's kind of what you would do if you ran into someone at the grocery store or at a kid's soccer game. You don't immediately launch into all the really disagreeable conversation. First, you find the common ground and you talk about what you have in common and where your shared value is. And when you start having the conversation there, it allows room for people to then get into the more controversial and difficult subjects. And I think that's one of the keys to kind of getting it going. I think, I just traveled actually back and forth across the country in an RV with my family because we wanted to. We're working from home, our kids working distantly, and I must have talked with a couple thousand different individuals. What I found was everyone's pretty much having the same life experiences. Where the complication comes in is when you start talking politics or climate change or about wearing masks. But if you start talking about, are you hurting right now? This is really a difficult time. Are your kids allowed to play sports? Are you, what are you doing with your free time? Have you picked up any hobbies? You'll find that almost everyone's exactly the same. And I found that you could have a lot more ways to get into those difficult conversations when you started with where can we find common ground first, rather than trying to bite off the controversial areas where you have disagreement first.
Okay, in a business context, though, I've had lots of difficult conversations, and I can do the small talk for about 2 or 3 minutes before the person I'm speaking with is, and this is especially true when it's a customer,
Yeah,
wants to move on to whatever it is that they want to talk about,
right.
which is going to put us at loggerheads. So how do we transition from that sort of easy conversation that we have with everybody to that difficult conversation we're going to have
Right.
with this individual?
Well, certainly in a business context, you hit it right on the head. I mean, I've worked with 185 different companies across the globe, and I think we've got 25 different active clients right now across the globe. People's political persuasions are all over the place. So you have to start with not what do I care about, what do I want to tell them, but you have to listen and find out what do they care about and where can we find common ground on what they care about. So I'll give you an example. Whether you're dealing with small businesses or big businesses, everyone's hurting financially this year. Everyone's worried about, are we going to have how long is this recession going to last? Will I be able to take care of my employees? Should I revert to having people come back to the office, or should I remain a virtual office space? And I engage them there and hear what their concerns are and what their anxieties are. And then that's when you start to offer the solutions. You don't launch right in with, hey, let me tell you about a bunch of stuff. But, for example, I can tell you to a T, 184 of the 185 companies we've worked with, no one engaged in 100% work remote. No one would give up on business travel before the pandemic. Now they all have. And I can tell you that, if I was, going to talk to people, back in February about, something controversial about, taking on environmentalism or climate change, it just wouldn't have gotten legs. And it still wouldn't get legs if I talk about it now. But if I talk to them about it now, say, hey, the world has changed. What has worked? What hasn't worked? What can we, do? Where are the other opportunities in a business context where we can continue to allow these things that we've become the new norm, but lean into them in a way that can help your business drive more value and save more money and help you drive revenue and maintain your customer base. And that's what, where the businesses want you to talk to them around sustainability. They don't want to, be sitting here saying, look how great your carbon emissions drop because, you're not traveling and employees aren't coming in and commuting to work. So I think you have to meet people where they are, where their concerns are, and look for the opening where you can have the conversation.
So where does personal responsibility come in from this? And let me explain what I mean by that. I'm having a difficult conversation with somebody. It's usually because they're unhappy about something. And I mean, this is very true in the business sense,
Sure.
not so much true in the personal sense, because there's a whole different conversation dynamic going there. But in the business sense, if I'm having a difficult conversation with you, it's mostly because you're really unhappy about something I've done, or I'm really unhappy about something you've done. Now, let's take the you've done first, because that's actually a more difficult conversation. I'm really unhappy with something that you've done, Kevin.
Mm-hmm.
So, how important is it for me to own my part of what that difficulty might have been?
It's incredibly important because let's just start at the very basics. Nobody likes being lectured to. Nobody likes someone coming up and pointing a finger at them and saying, you did this. One of the things that, we went at great lengths in talking about in this book, How to Talk to the Other Side, was that you never use the word you. It's kind of like, you can attack what someone has done, or a policy that they've done, or an action they've done, without attacking the person. And so often, especially right now, people are feeling very fragile and feeling very defensive. And so if you need to have a conversation with something that someone has done to you, which you can't say, hey, what you did really tick me off and I'm really upset. What you need to say is the action that was taken, is what really upset. And here's what the consequences and how it impacted me. And just like if I had an action where I did something and how it might impact you, but you focus on the action or the idea or the policy or something, as opposed to saying the word you, because when someone hears you, it carries their whole persona that you have, and you're not going to get anywhere. And the other side, again, is if you're really upset about something that was done, use appreciative inquiry. Ask them, hey, what happened? Why do you think there was conflict there? What was the source of that? I know we were at that, but was there something deeper? Was there something behind that I didn't understand, or that I misrepresented it, or something of that nature? And again, that'll allow people to kind of peel back the layers of the onion to tell you what's really going on, as opposed to kind of what was at the first level of blockage.
So, Kevin, I got to ask you another piece of jargon.
Yeah.
Which is, I kind of pride myself as being a jargon buster.
That's great.
I love appreciative inquiry, but I'm going to bet there's maybe 4% of the people listening to this podcast have any idea what that is. So
Yeah.
can you, and I'm a huge fan of appreciative inquiry and think it needs to be used a lot more. Can you please explain to us what it is?
Yeah, and I appreciate you doing that. I'm sorry I even use that term, because I usually don't use that term except when I'm talking to people such as yourself. It's basically asking people, really what is behind the issue. And I think it goes back to something that we probably all learned from our parents when we were little kids. It's, to listen first, if you want to be heard, you first need to hear, someone. And, I think that, finding out what is behind something, it's like a classic thing with anybody in a relationship. When you mess up doing the dishes at home, and your wife slams the door about something, it had nothing to do with the dishes, even though that's where it seemed like the argument might have come from. So you need to find out, hey, what's really going on? What other things are really under the surface there? And I think that's kind of what we're saying with appreciative inquiry is, you're really trying to get at the core as to what the issue was. And I think that all the time I find this on a human level, on a personal level, and certainly at a business level, that when I'm in a difficult conversation with someone and we're at complete odds, I never use the word you. I always try and understand it. I just say, help me understand what's going on here, or help me understand this issue and why that is so important to the goal that we're trying to accomplish here. And by just showing a little bit of, empathy, humility, the person on the other end has to kind of soften their own edge too. And it allows space for the conversation to happen. When the typical thing right now is, if you're a Republican or a Democrat, you're going to come in and you're going to tell someone what they need to do and what they need to change, or on a personal level, if there's something that someone did to you that really bothered you, and you're going to go and tell them why they were wrong and you were right, you're just not going to get anywhere.
You really hit on something really important right there, which I'd like to expand on a little bit, and that's the word vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
Or not vulnerability, excuse me. What was the word you used? I went to vulnerability.
Humility.
Humility, yes.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about why humility, and then moving to vulnerability, really helps with these difficult conversations.
Well, I think what it allows is, if you can show someone that you're not 100% right all the time, and that you're full of imperfections, then they will realize, hey, I know I'm not. I mean, everyone knows they're not perfect people, and their ideas aren't perfect. So it allows that kind of, I guess, humbleness to be in there. I would say though that a lot of times it's not what you say, but it's how you say it. I mean, we all know how we've reacted when someone says something that may be the truth, but they said it in a volume or a tone or a way that really just irked you. And, that, if you do that and you see someone's reaction, you have to immediately recoil and say, I'm sorry, let me apologize for my tone. What I'm trying to, kind of bring humor and levity back into the conversation, because, if someone is yelling at you, it doesn't matter what they're saying. No one likes to be yelled at. If someone is telling you or looking down on you, it does, again, they can be telling you everything that is absolutely right with your life, or wrong with your life that you need to improve, but you don't do it. I mean, think of it the way how doctors tell us that we need to lose weight versus, other friends. If someone comes up to you and says, you really need to lose weight and get your act in order and you need to get in shape, you're going to hear that very differently than, when someone says it to you in a nice way that says, you're going to miss out on some opportunities to play with your kids or grandkids or not be able to do some of the sports things you do. What we really need you to do is find a way to get more exercise and eat healthier, and here's some ways to do it. You just hear it so differently. And I think that again, that's part of it. I mean, I found so often when I'm trying to talk to people from the other side that they are so ready and so, just ready for a fight. And they're expecting someone to come in and fight with them and argue back. And that's what they really want, because that'll make them feel better about who they are. And when you go in and you shake their hand and just say, tell me what's going on. It sounds like a horrible situation. And if you can truly empathize with their situation and make it not be about you, but about the issue, it's kind of like someone's experience with race or sexism or, what they've experienced in life. You can disagree with their ideas, but you can't disagree with their experience. And I think that's where more often than not, people are trying to do is they're trying to say, no, my experience is right, and you should hear it from my perspective. As opposed to saying, oh my God, your experience, I can understand now why you may feel that way. Let's acknowledge that and then figure out how we can work forward.
Yeah, the thing I find, which works best for me in these situations, excuse me, and I'm curious about your thought on this, is when I can stay in the world of asking questions, I tend to do a whole lot better than when I start telling people what they should do. Because in my experience, by asking a good question, if you're overweight, you're overweight. I don't need to tell you that.
Right.
But if I ask you some questions about your feelings about your weight or exercise or diet or living a long life even, you're more likely to have a different conversation with me than if I start telling you, even in a kind way, of things you might think about.
Right.
And as I'm going through the questions, I can say, are you interested in some ideas? If they say
Right.
no, then you have to kind of respect that.
Exactly.
Now, in the workplace, if I'm a supervisor and I'm working with you, I'm still going to do the same thing. But there comes a point where I'm going to say, no, you have to do it this way.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, we need to agree to disagree. But in this particular case, I really need to have you do this.
Right.
And they're not going to be happy. Don't expect them to
Mm-hmm.
be happy. But you also might want to be thinking, is this the right person to be in your organization?
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the things that, not only in this book, but my previous book, Making Sustainability Stick, that I really hit on was, there's 6 different, personality types and how people learn. And, some people learn by being told, some people you have to show them, some people are visual learners, some are auditory learners, some are experiential learners. Extroverts want to be talked to and engaged in a different way than introverts want to be talked to. And I think that you're absolutely right in that, it's called leadership. you need someone to do something, and you've listened, but you've now said, hey, we need you to do this. You need to agree to disagree, but say, we need you to move forward, and this is why. And if they continue to push back, that's where it's all about leadership and accountability. And I think that's where people come into, is if you've got to be willing to to bend but not break. And I think that's the issue. And I think certainly I've noticed I have a number of millennial and Gen Z employees, and they need to be talked to a little differently. And my introverts need to be talked to a little differently than my extroverts. And people who are audio, some people learn by example or by story. And you have to understand how each person learns and hears things. And that takes time, but that's how you're going to be successful. That's what being a true leader is.
Yeah, I would agree with that. That makes sense to me. So, what is the most important? Actually, I'm gonna take a little side trip here. When
Sure.
I work with somebody, and this is around mistakes. Most
Sure.
business owners and blue collar businesses handle mistakes really poorly.
Hmm.
They don't think it's okay for anybody but them to make a mistake, and they don't even think it's
Right.
okay for them, and they never admit they made a mistake.
Right.
So that's a problem. So
Yeah.
when I am working with somebody and I'm in a situation, there's a mistake, my rule is we have to have a learning from it.
Hmm.
So if I go to somebody and said, okay, this was a problem, what did we learn? And most of the time, people will say, I don't know.
Yeah.
So my next question is, well, if you did know, what would it be?
Yeah.
And about 50% of the time, they still say, I don't know.
Right.
And then I have one that always works, which is, well, why don't you pretend you knew what had to be done? And if you were pretending, what would you say?
Yeah.
And if I can't get an answer then, I know the person is never going to be a good member on our team
Right.
because they're refusing to even take a bit of responsibility.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is so key. I love how you laid it out there, because those are three, ways to do it. I mean, I think that, what is a mistake? A mistake is a learning opportunity. Exactly. There's no such thing as failure. It's, because everyone's failed at something. And certainly a business owner has never been successful if they haven't had a few failures and a little, some scars that have informed them with how to do things differently. So I think creating a culture where people are open to learning, and that where mistakes aren't punished per se. I mean, certainly there's some that can be cause for major things, but where the majority of mistakes are not that big a deal. That you can learn from them, correct them, and make sure that they're not done in the future. But then share that information and make sure that people own that. That's important. But if you're right, if you give someone two or three opportunities to talk about how an issue played out, and they do not take any accountability or see any part in what they've done, then you know that that's going to happen again and again. And when this mistake, it might be one thing and it might be a much bigger one, because we all view the world through our own eyes. So as any manager will know, or any employee will know, they're right. And so whether you're the person who's right, or that everyone thinks they're right, and everyone can have a justification. So you need to make sure that the learning happens, and that not only does the learning happen, but that there's some kind of institutional memory as to what the mistake was. But I think that the harshest thing, like you said, in whether it's blue collar or white collar, is the idea of the infallible manager. It's baloney. Everyone's made mistakes, and if you have an area where people are afraid, what I tell my employees is like, you know, what I don't like is I don't like surprises. I don't mind mistakes, but what I really won't tolerate is a mistake that I have no idea about until it's too late to correct it. So I would rather you come to me, and immediately say, "Oh my gosh, we made a mistake, or we got something wrong in this contract or this deliverable," and we have time to rectify it, reach out to the client, correct it, get on good standing, change the deliverable, and give them the right thing. Then it's like, okay, there was a learning opportunity, and we fixed it. If you come to me on the 11th hour and be like, "Here's the mistake," and there's no time to correct it, that's when the anger can ensue.
Yeah, Kevin, unfortunately, we are out of time. And this conversation is really
Sure.
interesting. We could go on for a lot longer, but we don't have
Absolutely.
it. So, if people want to find you, how would they go about doing so?
You can go to my website. My company is Sustainable Business Consulting. So our web address is www.sustainablebizconsulting.com. You can also check me out at kevin-wilhelm.com, where not only you find more about information about my company, but the book, How to Talk to the Other Side, as well as a number of TED Talks that are out there on some of the same issues.
Cool. And I have two things I would like you to do. First is sort of easy because you're listening to this podcast, you're listening to someplace. So if you're listening to someplace, you can give an honest rating and review. Please go and do that. It's a big, big deal. It means an awful lot for how we get ranked on all the different podcast platforms that we're on. And the second thing I want you to do is I have been obsessed with a sustainable business. Mine's economically and personally sustainable. And I think personally sustainable fits in a lot with what we've been talking about today. But at the same time, once you create a sustainable and economically sustainable business, then you need to take the next step. And the next step is creating a business that's sale ready. Now, sale ready does not, and I'm going to repeat this, does not mean you're going to sell your business. What it does mean is that you created a business that somebody else wants to own, and there's 8 things you need to do to get there. And it's really easy to get this ebook. It's free. You just go to www.sustainablebusiness.co, that's .co, not .com, /sale ready. www.sustainablebusiness.co /sale ready. And this is Josh Patrick. You're with Kevin Wilhelm. We're at Cracking the Cash Flow Code. Thanks a lot for stopping by. I hope to see you back here really soon.